The bracket had been posted for 6 hours, and someone had already drawn a line through Marcus Cole's name. Not crossed it out, drawn a single diagonal line through it in silver marker, the way the Torvathi marked entries they considered administrative errors. The gesture was precise, almost bureaucratic. It meant, this entry does not belong here and should not have been printed. Marcus saw it when he arrived at the registration pavilion at dawn, his gym bag over one shoulder, his training wraps still damp from his morning session on the back lot of the Traverse Liaison office, where he had hung a heavy bag from a loading dock beam and worked combinations against it until his knuckles were raw, and the diplomatic staff on the second floor had stopped asking what the thumping sound was. He did not remove the line, he read the bracket instead. The Gelashan Open was the largest unarmed combat tournament in the Orion Traverse. 48 competitors from 11 species, selected through regional qualifiers that had been running for the better part of a standard year. The tournament itself lasted 3 days and followed a single elimination format with seeded rounds, each match a single 3-minute bout scored on a hybrid system, clean strikes to designated target zones, ring control, and what the Torvathi called keshal, a term that translated loosely as demonstrated superiority of presence. In practice, it meant the judges rewarded fighters who made their opponents look small. Marcus was seeded 48th, dead last. The only human entry in the tournament's 90-year history. His qualifier had been a bureaucratic anomaly. The Traverse Athletic Commission had opened a wildcard slot for developmental species the previous cycle, mostly as a diplomatic gesture toward species that had recently joined the Traverse Commerce Compact. Nobody expected a human to apply. When Marcus's application arrived through the Earth Liaison office, the commission processed it the way a customs bureau processes a misfiled form, stamped, logged, and forgotten about, until the bracket software pulled his name into the draw. By then it was too late to remove him without a formal hearing, and no one wanted the paperwork. So Marcus Cole, 31 years old, a former middleweight from a gym in Albuquerque that had closed down 2 years ago, stood in the registration pavilion of the Gelashan Arena complex on the morning of the first round, and read his bracket placement while a silver line declared him a clerical mistake. The pavilion was enormous. Vaulted ceilings of pale blue composite, smooth as eggshell, rose 30 meters overhead. The floor was polished obsidian black stone that reflected the overhead lights in long, rippling bands. Registration desks lined the far wall, staffed by Torvathi clerks in pale gray uniforms, their elongated faces impassive, their four-fingered hands moving through holographic forms with the practiced efficiency of people who had done this 90 times before. Around Marcus, the other competitors moved through the space in loose clusters. Most of them were Torvathi, tall, lean, gray-skinned, with a build that combined the reach of a heavyweight with the speed of a welterweight. The Torvathi had won the Open 63 times in 90 years. They moved like they owned the building, which they did. A cluster of Droshari competitors occupied the north side of the pavilion. They were shorter and wider than the Torvathi, built like compressed stone, with mottled brown skin and flat, heavy faces that suggested a species whose evolutionary environment had involved a great deal of being hit by things. The Droshari fought from a low base and relied on grappling and throws. They had won the Open 11 times, and they carried themselves with the particular confidence of people who knew they were the second best at something and had made peace with it. The remaining species filled in the gaps. A pair of Veshtari stood near the water station, their green scales catching the light, talking in low clicks. 3 Kalathi, pale and angular, stretched against the far wall with the unhurried precision of predators warming up for something they considered beneath them. A single Morhani, massive and slow, sat on a reinforced bench and stared at nothing in particular with the patience of a species that thought in geological time. Nobody looked at Marcus. This was not hostility. It was something more complete than that. It was the kind of not looking that happened when something was so far beneath consideration that the eye simply passed over it, the way a person's gaze moved over furniture. Marcus was furniture. He was the folding chair someone had left in the wrong room. He set his bag down on a bench and began wrapping his hands. The wraps were cotton. He had brought 4 pairs from Earth Plain White, hand-cut from a bolt he had bought at a fabric store in Albuquerque before shipping out. The Torvathi used a synthetic binding compound that hardened on contact and distributed impact force across the entire surface of the hand. The Droshari used no wraps at all. Their hands were dense enough to absorb their own strikes without damage. Every other competitor in the pavilion used some variant of engineered impact protection, calibrated to their species' biomechanics. Marcus used cotton strips and a particular way of folding them across the knuckles that his coach, a quiet man named Ray Delgado, who had run a gym on 4th Street for 30 years and never turned away a kid who couldn't pay, had taught him when he was 14 years old. He was halfway through the left hand when a shadow fell across the bench. He looked up. The Torvathi standing over him was tall even by Torvathi standards, with darker gray skin and a jawline that came to a sharper point than most. He wore a sleeveless training top that showed arms corded with lean muscle, and his tournament sash deep blue, indicating a top 8 seed, was tied at his left hip with the casual precision of a man who had worn one many times. His name, according to the bracket, was Kethan Vor, seed number 3, 2-time finalist. He had a training staff of 7 and a biomechanical analyst who traveled with him to every competition. Kethan Vor looked at the cotton wraps. Then he looked at Marcus's hands, which were calloused and scarred across the knuckles in a way that came from years of hitting heavy bags without adequate protection. Then he looked at Marcus's shoes, flat-soled, thin, the kind of minimal footwear that provided ground feel at the cost of everything else. Then he looked at the gym bag, which was canvas, fraying at one strap, and had a small embroidered logo that read Delgado's Boxing in thread that was fading from red to pink. "Dirt," Kethan Vor said. Marcus paused his rapping. "Excuse me." "You train on dirt." Kethan Vor said it the way a sommelier might identify a particular vintage, not as an insult, but as a clinical observation. He had looked at Marcus's shoes and his hands and his wraps, and assembled a picture with the analytical efficiency of a species that considered combat a branch of applied science. Your footwork is calibrated to an uneven surface. Your hand protection is textile. Your callus pattern suggests repetitive impact training against a non-adaptive surface. He paused. You train on dirt with bags. Marcus finished the fold on his left hand and started on the right. Mostly. The arena floor is Torvathi competition-grade composite. 0 friction coefficient. Responsive dampening. It reads your weight distribution in real time and adjusts surface tension to reward balanced positioning. The scoring algorithms integrate floor data. A fighter who maintains optimal biomechanical alignment earns a passive Keshal advantage before throwing a single strike. Kethan Vor paused again, and something that might have been amusement moved behind his eyes, the Torvathi version of finding something mildly diverting. You will find it different from dirt. Probably. Kethan Vor studied him for another moment. His expression was not contemptuous. Contempt implied engagement, and this was something prior to engagement. It was the expression of a man looking at a scheduling error that had somehow made it to fight day. A mild curiosity about how the system had misfired, and a complete absence of concern about the consequences. Your first match is against Thaler Ven, seed 17. He is a pressure fighter. He will close distance immediately and target your center mass with rotational strikes. His reach exceeds yours by approximately 40%. He finished his regional qualifier in 9 seconds. You will have approximately 4 seconds before the first scoring exchange. Marcus looked up from his rapping. Is that advice? It is information, Kethan Vor said. The match will last between 12 and 20 seconds. I am telling you what those seconds will contain, so that you may prepare yourself for the experience." He turned and walked away, his movement fluid and economical, the kind of locomotion that came from a body that had been trained since childhood in a system designed by people who considered biomechanics a form of mathematics. Two other Torvathi, who had been watching the exchange from a respectful distance, fell into step beside him. One of them said something in Torvathi that Marcus did not catch, and Kethan Vor answered with a short phrase that made both of them produce the Torvathi equivalent of a laugh, a brief contraction of the jaw muscles that pulled the lips back from the teeth without separating them. Marcus finished wrapping his right hand. He flexed both fists, testing the tension. The wraps were good, snug across the knuckles, loose enough at the wrist for full rotation, with the heel of the palm covered but not restricted. He had done this 10,000 times. The motion was older than thought. He stood up, found a clear space against the wall, and began his warm-up. It was not impressive to watch. The other competitors warmed up with species-specific combat forms. The Torvathi moved through their flowing, extended patterns of strikes and evasions, each movement precisely calculated and annotated by the biomechanical analysts who hovered at the edges with data pads, cataloging force vectors and joint angles. The Droshari performed isometric holds and ground position drills, their compact bodies sinking into stances that looked rooted to the stone beneath them. The Kalathi stretched through joint mobility sequences that bordered on contortion, their pale limbs bending at angles that suggested an entirely different relationship with the concept of skeletal integrity. Marcus skipped rope for 3 minutes using an imaginary rope. Then he shadowboxed for 10. Short combinations, jab, cross, hook, nothing fancy, nothing that would make a highlight reel. His footwork was small and tight, his guard stayed high, and his head moved in a rhythm that came from years of having things thrown at it by people who meant it. He looked to the room full of galactic-caliber combat athletes, like a man doing warm-up exercises for a job at a warehouse. Nobody watched, except a small Torvathi woman near the official's table who was entering data into a holopad. She watched for 30 seconds, tilted her head slightly in the way the Torvathi did when they encountered data that did not immediately sort into a category, and went back to her work. The first round began at midday. The arena was a perfect circle, 20 meters in diameter, sunk 3 meters below the spectator level so that the audience looked down into it like a surgical theater. The floor was the competition-grade composite Kethan Vor had described, pale gray and faintly luminescent, with scoring zones marked in thin lines of blue light that pulsed when a strike landed in them. The stands held 6,000, and they were full. Gelashan took its fighting seriously, the way some civilizations took their opera. The noise was a low, constant hum of Torvathi conversation, punctuated by the sharp clicks of Droshari spectators, and the occasional high trill of a Kalathi who had seen something worth commenting on. Marcus's match was third on the card. He watched the first two from the competitor's tunnel, standing with his arms folded and his face still. Both were Torvathi versus Torvathi matchups, and both lasted less than 40 seconds. The fighters moved with a speed and precision that was genuinely beautiful, long, sweeping strikes that covered the full diameter of the ring, footwork that looked choreographed, the composite floor reading, and rewarding their balance in real time with micro-adjustments that the fighters had been trained since childhood to exploit. The scoring system projected hit counts and Keshal ratings on the arena walls in floating blue digits. The numbers were high. The crowd approved with low, resonant hums. Marcus watched and said nothing. He noted the distance they covered between strikes. He noted the recovery time after rotational techniques. He noted the way the floor's responsive dampening created a half-beat delay at the end of each combination, a moment when the surface was recalibrating and the fighter's footing was fractionally softer. He filed each observation in the same place he had always filed such things, somewhere behind his sternum, where the body kept its own records. His opponent, Thaler Vin, was already in the arena when Marcus walked down the ramp. Thaler was a mid-tier Torvathi, younger than Kethan Vor, with skin the color of wet clay and the coiled energy of a fighter who relied on forward pressure and volume. He was rolling his shoulders in his corner, loose and confident, and he did not acknowledge Marcus's entrance the way he would not have acknowledged a door opening. The arena announcer introduced them. The introduction of Thaler was detailed and warm: career record, notable victories, training lineage. Marcus's introduction was brief and factual: species, human, homeworld, Earth, seed, 48. There was a sound from the crowd that was not quite laughter, more like the polite exhalation that follows an unexpected item on a menu, a clearing of the throat before the real meal begins. The referee, a senior Torvathi in white, looked at both fighters. Standard rules: 3-minute round, scoring by strike, control, and keshal. Begin on the tone. Marcus moved to his mark. Thaler moved to his. The tone sounded. Kethan Vor had been right about the 4 seconds. Thaler closed distance immediately, cutting the ring in 3 long strides, his rotation already loaded, the composite floor reading his weight transfer and locking his back foot for maximum torque. The first strike was a sweeping cross aimed at Marcus's temple, delivered with the full-body rotational force of a species whose skeletal structure was engineered for exactly this motion. Marcus slipped it. Not blocked it, not dodged it with a dramatic leap backward. Slipped it. His head moved 4 inches to the left. The strike passed through the space where his skull had been a quarter second earlier, and his feet did not move. The composite floor registered no weight shift. The scoring system noted nothing. To the 6,000 spectators looking down, it looked like a minor miscalculation on Thaler's part, a strike that had missed by a margin that suggested the aim was slightly off. Marcus knew what it was. It was the first thing Ray Delgado had taught him: before the jab, before the cross, before anything that made contact. The slip, the art of being where the punch isn't. Hands come later, Ray had said, wrapping Marcus's 14-year-old knuckles for the first time. The head comes first. The head is everything. Thaler recovered with the mechanical precision of his training and threw a combination, 3 strikes, rotating through high, mid, and low targets, each one delivered with the clean efficiency of a system that had been refined across 90 years of competition. Marcus slipped the first, parried the second with his forearm, and stepped inside the third so that it landed on his shoulder instead of his ribs. The impact was real. His shoulder registered it with a jolt that ran down to his elbow. He absorbed it with a small grunt and let the force push him into position. He was inside Thaler's reach now. The Torvathi fighting system was built for distance. Their long arms and extended reach meant that the optimal engagement zone was at arm's length or beyond, where their rotational strikes could generate full force across their extended arc. Inside that range, the geometry changed. The sweeping strikes lost their leverage. The rotational power that made them devastating at distance became a liability at close quarters, because the rotation needed space to generate force, and space was the one thing Marcus had just taken away. He fired a jab, short, compact, straight down the center. It landed on Thaler's sternum with a sound like a hand slapping a table. Nothing theatrical, nothing devastating, just a clean strike delivered from a range where Thaler had no trained response, because no opponent in the Gelashian Open's 90-year history had ever wanted to be this close to a Torvathi. The scoring system registered it. The crowd noise dropped fractionally, not alarm, but the quieting of a room where a number has appeared that doesn't match the spreadsheet. Thaler stepped back to reestablish distance, his footwork automatic, his long legs carrying him out of range with a single stride. Marcus followed, not chasing, following. The distinction mattered. Chasing was reactive, desperate, the arms reaching for something retreating. Following was pressure controlled, the feet doing the work while the hands stayed home. Ray had beaten this distinction into him over 3 years of sparring sessions. Stop chasing. He's not running from you. You're walking toward him. There's a difference. Thaler threw another combination, faster now. The volume increased, trying to catch Marcus pulling back. Marcus didn't pull back. He rolled under the first strike, the movement coming from his hips and knees rather than his feet, the kind of defensive motion that the composite floor could not read because it happened above the ankles. He caught the second strike on his guard and came up with a hook to the body that landed flush on Thaler's floating rib. The impact sound was deeper this time, the kind of sound that carried information about the tissue beneath the strike. The scoring system registered the hit and the target zone bonus. The crowd noise dropped another degree. Thaler made a sound, not pain, surprise. The Torvathi expression for surprise was a quick widening of the inner eyelids, a flash of pale membrane that was normally hidden. It happened and was gone, but Marcus saw it, because he had trained himself to watch eyes the way some people watched hands. He reset. Marcus let him. Stood in the center of the ring with his hands up, weight balanced, watching. Not pressing the advantage, not showboating, not doing anything that could be interpreted as display. Just standing there in the wrong part of the ring, on a floor built for a different species, with cotton wraps and flat shoes, waiting. The crowd was quieter now. The processing hum had changed frequency. Thaler came in again, but differently. He feinted high, a quick snap of his leading hand that was designed to draw Marcus's guard up, and drove low, trying for a body lock that would let him use his height advantage in the clinch. It was a smart adjustment, the first adaptation Marcus had seen, the moment when Thaler stopped fighting his system and started fighting his opponent. Marcus recognized it because he had spent 3 months preparing for exactly this. The Traverse Liaison facility did not have a training gym. It had a back parking lot, a loading dock, and a stairwell. But it also had a small gymnasium on the 3rd floor where visiting species representatives held exercise sessions. And Marcus had spent those 3 months training against anyone who would agree to it, Torvathi technical advisors from the Commerce Office, a Droshari wrestler from the shipping delegation who thought the whole idea was hilarious, a Kalathi instructor who taught joint mechanics at the Liaison evening program, and had been genuinely curious about what a human could do with his hands. He sprawled the takedown attempt, driving his hip into Thaler's shoulder at the moment of contact and posting on his head to break the angle. Then he stood up and stepped back. Clean. The clock showed 90 seconds remaining. The scoring display showed Marcus leading by 3 clean strikes to 1. The Keshal rating, the subjective demonstrated superiority score, was still zeroed for both fighters, because the judges had not yet decided what they were watching. Thaler came in for the 4th time. He was faster now, more committed, the measured precision replaced by something that looked closer to urgency. He threw a 4-strike combination at full speed, the kind of sequence that one matches against other Torvathi because the volume was overwhelming, and the floor rewarded the rotational biomechanics so completely that each strike was backed by the arena itself. Marcus let 2 of them land. Not because he couldn't avoid them, because he chose to absorb them. They hit his guard, his forearms, and he used the contact to time Thaler's rhythm. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. The pattern was there. It was always there. Everyone had a pattern, a beat, a rhythm they fell into when the pressure rose and the body took over from the mind. Finding it was the oldest trick in a sport that was older than the Torvathi civilization by several thousand years. On the reset, Marcus threw his own combination for the first time. Jab, cross, hook, straight right. 4 punches in under 2 seconds. Short, compact, delivered from a stance that was 6 inches narrower than the Torvathi optimal and 2 inches lower. The jab split Thaler's guard. The cross landed on his cheek. The hook caught his jaw on the turn. The straight right hit him in the center of the chest and sat him down. Thaler then, seed 17, regional finalist twice, sat on the composite floor of the Gelashian arena with his legs folded under him, and an expression on his face that Marcus had seen many times before, on many faces, in many gyms, in a small city in the American Southwest. It was the expression of a person who had just learned something they had not expected to learn today. The referee counted. Thaler stood at 6. The match resumed. 30 seconds remained. Marcus spent those 30 seconds doing exactly what he had done in the first 2.5 minutes, moving forward, staying compact, making the ring small. 2 more clean strikes, delivered with the same mechanical efficiency. No flashy combinations. No celebration. No acknowledgement that the knockdown had happened. He worked the center of the ring with the quiet competence of a carpenter sanding a joint, each motion purposeful and small and exactly as large as it needed to be. The tone sounded. The scoring display showed Marcus winning by 8 clean strikes to 3, with a Keschel rating of 0 for both fighters. The judges had rated neither fighter's presence as superior because the match had not fit into any category they had a rating for. The crowd was silent, not stunned silent, processing silent. The Torvathi were a cerebral species. They were calculating, and the math was not working the way they expected. Marcus walked back to the competitor's tunnel. He sat down on his bench, unwrapped his right hand to check the knuckles. One was starting to swell where the straight right had landed on the sternum plate, rewrapped it, and drank water from a container he had brought from the liaison facility. Plain water. No electrolyte compound, no recovery solution, no nanoscale hydration matrix. Water from a bottle. The small Torvathi woman from the officials' table appeared at the tunnel entrance. She had her holopad, and her head was tilted again. "The arena floor registered your weight distribution throughout the match," she said. "You adjusted for the friction coefficient within the first 8 seconds. "Felt it out," Marcus said. "Your stance width narrowed by 4 centimeters between the opening exchange and the knockdown. Your center of gravity dropped by 1.6 centimeters. These adjustments do not correspond to any fighting methodology in the tactical database." I got comfortable. She looked at her data for a long moment. Her expression was the kind of neutral that took effort to maintain. The composite floor is designed to reward Torvathi biomechanics. Optimal scoring coefficients are calibrated to our stride length, rotational axis, and mass distribution. Your stride length is 30% shorter than the optimal range, and your rotational axis is lower by 42%. The floor should have penalized your movement profile with reduced surface compliance. It probably did. She tilted her head the other way. You scored 8 clean strikes against a seated opponent on a floor that was actively working against your biomechanics. Marcus took another drink of water. Floor didn't throw punches. She stood there for a moment longer, as if she wanted to say something else but had not yet found the right category for it. Then she looked at her holopad, entered something with quick, precise keystrokes, and left. The second round was that afternoon. Marcus's opponent was a Droshari named Grosk, seed 9, a grappler who had won 7 consecutive regional titles in the outer shelf circuit. Grosk was built low and wide, with arms that looked like they had been designed by someone who wanted to see what happened when you gave a boulder opposable thumbs and a competitive streak. He had won his first-round match by throwing his opponent out of the scoring zone in 11 seconds, not a record, but close enough that the announcer had mentioned it. The crowd noise had changed for Marcus's second match. It was not louder or quieter, but the quality was different. There was attention in it. Not anticipation, attention. The way a room sounds when something unexpected has entered it and people are waiting to see whether it will do the unexpected thing again or whether the first time was a fluke. Marcus entered the arena. Grosk was already there, standing in his corner with his feet wide and his center of gravity approximately 18 inches from the floor. He looked at Marcus the way, A man looks at a math problem he has not bothered to solve, because the answer is obvious. The tone sounded. Grosk came forward like a landslide. Low, wide, irresistible. The Droshari did not close distance the way the Torvathi did. They consumed it. The floor responded to Grosk's mass by increasing surface tension, locking his feet into the composite and giving him the platform stability of a building foundation. Where the Torvathi used the floor as a partner, the Droshari used it as bedrock. Marcus circled, not a way around. He kept moving laterally, making Grosk adjust, forcing the heavier fighter to turn and reset his base. Every time Grosk set his stance for a charge, Marcus shifted angle by 15 degrees and made him rebuild the platform from scratch. It was not exciting fighting. It was geometry. And Grosk, who had built a career on the premise that geometry was something that happened to other people, was beginning to show the first signs of a problem he had not trained for. Grosk closed on the sixth attempt, driving forward with both arms extended in a frame that would collapse into a body lock the moment it made contact. Marcus timed the entry, stepped to the side at 45 degrees, the angle that gave him the most time and the least exposure, and hit Grosk with 3 quick punches to the side of the head as the Droshari's momentum carried him past. Not hard punches. The Droshari's skull was dense enough to absorb a blow from a hydraulic press without complaint. Measured punches, scoring punches, the kind that did not need to damage to count. Grosk turned, his heavy face flushed with something between irritation and confusion. The confusion was the important part. He charged again. Marcus moved again. 3 more scoring strikes from angles that Grosk's compact frame could not cover because covering them would have required him to stand up, and standing up would have cost him his base. The pattern held for 2 minutes. Grosk charged, Marcus moved, strikes landed. The Droshari grew more committed with each attempt, driving harder, reaching farther, his technique eroding under the frustration of chasing something he could not catch and could not close on and could not threaten from distance, because the Droshari did not have a distance game and had never needed one. It was the oldest story in fighting. The mover beats the charger, because movement costs less energy than mass displacement. Marcus did not try to hurt Grosk. He did not need to. He accumulated points instead, clean, precise, unremarkable strikes that the scoring system counted with mechanical fairness, while the crowd watched the Droshari champion of the outer shelf chase a human around the ring like a man trying to catch rain in his hands. The Keshal rating appeared on the board for the first time in Marcus's tournament. Marcus, 3.2. Grosk, 0.8. The judges had seen something they considered demonstrated superiority of presence, and they had, reluctantly, admitted it into the record. The tone sounded. Marcus won on points, 9-2. The crowd noise was different now. There was a thread of genuine interest woven through the processing hum, the sound of a species that valued analysis encountering something it had not yet analyzed. Marcus went back to the tunnel. He drank water. He ate a protein bar from a box of 12 he had packed in Albuquerque before shipping out, the same brand he had eaten between rounds at every amateur fight he had ever had. He rewrapped his hands with the second pair of cotton strips. He sat with his back against the cool wall, closed his eyes, and rested for 20 minutes. When he opened them, Kethan Vor was standing in front of him. The number 3 seed had a different expression now. The scheduling error curiosity was gone, replaced by something harder to read, a recalibration happening behind the eyes, the quiet revision of a certainty that had been comfortable. "You do not fight the way they teach fighting," Kethan Vor said. "No," Marcus agreed. "You fight the way someone fights when they have been hit many times and have decided that being hit matters less than the things you learn from it." Marcus looked at him, something like that. "Your technique is not sophisticated. Your combinations are basic. Your footwork is functional, not elegant. Your defense relies on anticipation rather than biomechanical optimization." "True." And you are winning. Marcus did not answer this. He took a drink of water. The water was warm. Kethanvor stood there for a moment longer than necessary. His expression was the one Marcus had learned to recognize over a lifetime of fighting not in aliens, but in humans, in the moment when a confident person first confronted the possibility that their categories might have a gap. Not fear, something quieter than fear and more uncomfortable. Relevance anxiety. The dawning suspicion that the system they had organized the world with did not have a file for this. We will meet in the quarterfinals, Kethanvor said, if you survive the third round. We'll see. Kethanvor left. His stride was exactly the same length as before, but Marcus noticed that the casual looseness was gone. He was walking like a man who had started thinking about something. Marcus closed his eyes again. The third round was the next morning. Marcus's opponent was a Calathi named Cyrene, Seed 5, a technical fighter whose joint manipulation style had produced 3 submission victories in the last 2 opens. Cyrene was tall, narrow, and flexible enough to strike from angles that should not have been geometrically possible. Her species fought with a precision that made the Torvathi look like they were working with blunt instruments, and her career record included 4 matches that had ended with her opponent tapping out to a limb control that the victim later described as suddenly being unable to remember which direction my elbow was supposed to go. The arena was fuller for this match. Word had spread through whatever channels the Torvathi used to distribute information they found interesting, and the seating in the upper tiers had acquired the particular density of an audience that was there to watch something specific. The brackets were projected on the arena walls, and Marcus's advancing line, 48th to 24th to 12th, had the visual drama of something that should not be happening but was. The tone sounded. Cyrene opened with a probing combination from distance, her pale limbs extending at angles that tested Marcus's guard from 3 different directions simultaneously. Her arm could reach his head while her elbow targeted his ribs, and her other hand was already moving toward a wrist control. She was faster than Thaler, more precise than Grosk, and her striking came from a framework of combat biomechanics that Marcus had never encountered, because no human had ever fought a Calathi in any organized competition. He ate the first 30 seconds. 3 strikes landed. 1 caught his ribs. His guard absorbed a sequence that would have opened most fighters up like a letter. He let them come, not passively, actively, with his eyes open and his hands registering every contact point. He was measuring the angles, learning the rhythm, reading the language of a body that fought from a different set of assumptions than anything he had trained against. Every fighter had a rhythm. Cyrene's was syncopated 1-2 pause 3. The pause was where she read the opponent's response and adjusted her next combination to exploit whatever defensive gap the response created. It was elegant. It was also predictable, once you knew the beat. Marcus began working at 45 seconds. Short, straight combinations timed to land during the pause, disrupting the read. Jab during her assessment window. Cross while she was recalibrating. Nothing complicated. Just interference, the way a drummer drops an offbeat to break another musician's groove. Cyrene adjusted. She shortened her pause, speeding up her cycle. He adjusted to the adjustment, moved the jab earlier, caught the new timing, kept the pressure in the space where she did her thinking. The match became a conversation conducted in punches and angles, each fighter adapting in real time, the scoring system clicking upward on both sides while the crowd leaned forward in their seats with the focused attention of people watching a very fast game of chess played with fists. At 90 seconds, Marcus found the angle he had been looking for. Cyrene's flexibility was her strength, and her exposure she struck from wide angles, but wide angles meant recovery time, a brief window where the extended limb was returning to guard position and the fighter was geometrically open to straight-line attacks. Not wide hooks, not sweeping strikes. Straight lines. The jab, the cross. The most basic tools in the most basic fighting vocabulary. thrown straight down the center while the opponent was still rotating back from a complex technique that had covered 3 target zones and looked spectacular and missed. He landed 4 clean jabs in 12 seconds, each one on the exact same spot on Cyrene's upper sternum. The same target, the same distance, the same angle. 4 identical straight punches delivered with the kind of mechanical consistency that did not come from talent or athleticism, but from repetition, from throwing that punch 10,000 times against a leather bag hanging from a beam in a parking lot, until the motion was not a decision but a reflex, and the reflex was not a response but a fact. Cyrene's expression did not change. The Calathi did not show surprise the way other species did, but her footwork shifted, pulling back, creating space, the first defensive adjustment she had made in the tournament. The first time in 3 fights that Cyrene had decided she would rather be farther from her opponent than closer. The crowd noise changed again. It was louder now, and there was a quality to it that Marcus could feel in his chest. These were not cheering spectators. These were analysts whose data was not behaving as expected, and they wanted to see what it would do next. The match went the full 3 minutes. Marcus won on points, 7-5, with a Keshal rating of 4.1 that the judges had been forced to assign because the alternative was pretending they had not seen what they had seen. Marcus walked back to the tunnel. His ribs were bruised from Cyrene's opening sequence, and his left shoulder had taken a strike that would stiffen by evening. He sat on his bench, drank water, and pressed a cold pack against his side. The quarterfinal was that afternoon. Kethan Vor was waiting in the arena. The crowd was the fullest it had been, and the noise was the loudest it had been, and for the first time since the tournament began, Marcus noticed that some of the spectators were looking at him before the match started. Not the not looking of the first morning when he was furniture. Looking. Watching him walk down the ramp with the gym bag over his shoulder and the cotton wraps and the flat shoes, trying to understand the relationship between what they saw and what the scoring system said was happening. Kethan Vor stood in his corner with the stillness of a fighter who had spent his entire career knowing exactly what he was. Seed 3, 2-time finalist, the best technical striker in the Traverse, according to every quantitative measure the Torvathi had devised. His training was engineered to the limits of Torvathi biomechanical science, his technique refined through decades of competition at the highest level, his understanding of the arena floor and the scoring system, and the judges' criteria so complete that fighting him was like fighting the institution itself. Marcus stood in his corner with cotton wraps and flat shoes and a bruised rib. The tone sounded. Kethan Vor did not rush. He advanced at a measured pace, establishing ring control with his movement, his reach, and his presence. His first combination was exploratory, 3 strikes at 3 different speeds, testing Marcus's reactions, reading the timing of his slips, measuring the gaps in his guard the way an engineer measures tolerances. Marcus slipped the first 2 and caught the third on his guard. Kethan Vor's inner eyelids flickered. He had felt something in that exchange, the timing of Marcus's defense, the economy of the movement, the way the human stayed compact and small in a way that made the arena floor's biomechanical rewards irrelevant because the floor could only reward what it could read, and Marcus's defensive system operated in a range too small for the sensors. The second exchange was harder. Kethan Vor adjusted his range, shortened his strikes, and threw combinations that mixed speed and rhythm in ways the other competitors had not. Marcus absorbed some of them. His guard held, but the force was different. Kethan Vor hit harder than anyone Marcus had faced in the tournament, with a precision that found the smallest gaps in his defense and exploited them with the clinical efficiency of a surgeon cutting along dotted lines. Marcus took a clean strike to the jaw at the 40-second mark. It was the hardest he had been hit since arriving in Gelashen. His vision blurred for a quarter-second, the arena lights smearing into white streaks, and his feet shifted on the composite floor. The floor read the shift immediately and reduced surface compliance, making his footing softer, less stable. The scoring system noted the positional degradation. The crowd saw it. Marcus reset. He did not shake his head, did not touch his jaw, did not give any external sign that the strike had landed with the force it had. He reset his guard, found his stance, and moved forward. This was what Kethan Vor had not expected. The Torvathi system was built on escalation. You hit your opponent with a clean strike, their balance shifted, the floor penalized their instability, and you pressed the advantage while the surface worked against them. The cycle fed itself. Hit, destabilize, press, hit again. It worked against every species in the tournament because every species responded to being hit by trying to recover. And recovering meant moving, and moving on an unfamiliar floor while hurt meant losing more position, and losing position meant the floor penalized you further. Marcus did not try to recover. He absorbed the hit and walked forward into the next one. Kethan Vor threw a second combination. Marcus took the first strike on his forearm, slipped the second, and stepped inside the third. He was inside now, in the range where Torvathi's striking lost its leverage, where the long arms became load-bearing structures searching for a use, where Marcus's compact frame and short punches were the only tools that worked. He hit Kethan Vor with a three-punch combination to the body: liver, floating rib, solar plexus. Short, heavy, delivered from a distance of 8 inches with the kind of mechanical accuracy that came from hitting the heavy bag 10,000 times, on a concrete floor, in a closed gym in Albuquerque, while a man named Ray counted the rounds on a kitchen timer. Kethan Vor's breath left him. For one moment, the two-time finalist's posture changed, not collapse, not retreat, but a contraction, the body folding inward to protect the places that had been struck, the autonomic response of a nervous system that had just received information it did not want. It lasted half a second. Then Kethan Vor's training took over, and he pivoted out, re-establishing distance with a long backward stride, covering the retreat with a defensive combination that was technically perfect and spiritually defeated. The clock showed 90 seconds remaining. Marcus pursued. Not quickly, not dramatically. He walked forward with his hands up and his head moving, cutting the ring with small steps, making the space smaller. Kethan Vor circled, struck, retreated. Marcus slipped, absorbed, followed, struck when the distance collapsed. Let Kethan rebuild it, followed again. The scoring system ticked upward. With 30 seconds remaining, Marcus landed a right hand on Kethan Vor's chin. It was not the hardest punch he had ever thrown. It was the most precise thrown, with the kind of timing that could not be engineered or optimized or computed. The timing that came from standing in front of another person 10,000 times, and learning the difference between the moment before the moment and the moment itself. Kethan Vor's legs stiffened. His eyes went wide, the inner eyelids fully retracted. He did not fall, but he stopped. And in that stop there was everything: the recalibration, the admission, the grudging acknowledgement that the thing in front of him was not a scheduling error. The tone sounded. The scoring display showed Marcus winning by 6 strikes to 4, with a Keshal rating of 6.3, the highest of the tournament. Marcus walked back to the tunnel. He sat on his bench. His hands were sore, his ribs ached, and the cold pack had gone warm hours ago. He drank water. He unwrapped his hands, examined his knuckles, and rewrapped them with the third pair of cotton strips. The semi-final was the next morning. His opponent was a Droshari veteran named Korvac, the number 2 seed, a 3-time Open champion who had lost only 4 matches in a 12-year career. Korvac was everything Grosk had been, but refined the same mass and power, but with footwork that eliminated the charging problem. He closed distance methodically, patiently, cutting angles with the precision of a species that had spent 1,000 years turning grappling into an exact science. Marcus fought him for 3 minutes using a strategy that had no name in any martial arts system in the Traverse. He stood still. He stood in the center of the ring and let Korvac come to him. Every time the Droshari closed distance, Marcus fired 2 punches and shifted angle by 90 degrees. Not laterally, not backward. A hard pivot, the entire stance rotating around a central point that was his own spine. The kind of movement that should not have worked on a floor calibrated for Torvathi biomechanics because the pivot point was too narrow, the base too small, the weight transfer too compact for the sensors to read. But the floor did not penalize it because Marcus was never off balance. His center of gravity stayed in the same place. His weight distribution never shifted beyond the tolerance band. He was doing something the floor's designers had never anticipated, fighting from a stance so small and so settled that the biomechanical sensors had nothing to penalize. The floor rewarded stability. Marcus was stable. The floor did not care how he achieved it. Korvac spent 3 minutes walking into punches and pivots. He was never hurt. He was never in danger. He simply could not solve the problem of a man who was always in the place he had just left and never in the place he arrived. Marcus won on points, 11-2. The Keshal rating was 5.7 to 0.4. The final was that evening. Marcus's opponent was Velan Sur, the #1 seed, the defending champion, the most decorated fighter in the history of the Gelashian Open. Velan Sur had won the tournament 4 consecutive times. She was the closest thing the Torvathi had to a living institution, and she had been watching Marcus's matches from the officials' gallery with the careful attention of a person who recognized a structural problem before it became a structural failure. Marcus found this out when he arrived at the arena for the final and saw that the warm-up area had been rearranged. The traditional pre-fight layout placed both competitors' stations at opposite ends of the tunnel, separated by a divider. The divider had been removed. Velan Sur stood 30 feet away, and she was watching him unwrap and rewrap his hands with the last pair of cotton strips. She was lean and precise, with slate-gray skin and eyes that were slightly darker than the standard Torvathi coloration, as if they held more data than the usual model. Her tournament sash was gold. She stood with her hands clasped behind her back and observed him with the same unhurried attention she might have given to a structural analysis of a building she was about to enter. "Cotton," she said. Marcus kept rapping, "Yes." 4 fights, 34 clean strikes, 0 penalties from the arena floor, 1 knockdown, against a seeded fighter 29 ranks above you. Your Keshal rating has risen from 0 to 6.3 across 4 rounds. He looked at her. Her expression was neither hostile nor amused. It was the expression of professional recognition, one practitioner acknowledging another's work in a language they both understood. "Your species has been in the Traverse for 9 years, she said. In that time, no human has competed in any event above regional qualifying level. No human fighting methodology appears in the Torvathi tactical database. No biomechanical study of human combat movement exists in our archives." She paused. "That is going to change after tonight, regardless of the result." Marcus finished his rap. He flexed his hands. The cotton was snug. "Okay." Velan Sur studied him for one more moment. Then she turned and walked to her station with the economical grace of a person whose body was a precision instrument that she maintained with professional seriousness. The arena was packed beyond capacity. Spectators stood in the aisles, sat on the stairs, watched from the maintenance gantries above the overhead lights. The bracket projection on the arena wall showed Marcus's line, 48th to 24th to 12th to 6th to 2nd, climbing the chart like a crack running upward through a foundation. The tone sounded. Velan Sur fought nothing like the others. She had studied his matches, and she had done what none of the others had done. She had understood them. She knew his range, his timing, his preference for straight-line attacks inside the opponent's reach. She knew about the pivot. She knew about the pause disruption. She came in with a strategy that no other opponent had used. she matched his pace. Instead of closing distance or circling or charging, she stood at medium range and fought at his speed. Compact combinations, short arcs, no wasted motion. She had stripped her own style down to its essentials and rebuilt it around the one insight that mattered. The human was not faster or stronger or more skilled than a Torvathi champion. He was more efficient. He did less and made it count for more. So she did less too. The first 60 seconds were the most technically demanding fighting Marcus had experienced in his career. Every combination was met with a counter. Every slip was anticipated. Every angle was closed before he could take it. Velan Sur was fighting his fight on his terms, and she was good enough to do it. The scoring display stayed even, 3-3, 4-4. The Keshal rating was high for both. The judges were watching a conversation between two fighters who had stopped trying to overwhelm each other and started trying to outthink each other, and they were rating the thinking itself. At 90 seconds, Marcus changed. He did not change his technique. He did not change his strategy. He changed something that the scoring system could not measure and the arena floor could not read, and the judges could not assign a Keshal rating to, because they had no category for it. He got quieter. His movements became smaller, his breathing slowed. His combinations shortened to 2 punches, then 1, each one placed with the kind of precision that came from a place deeper than training. He was not fighting from muscle memory. He was fighting from the place that muscle memory came from, the place where repetition becomes identity, where the 10,000th jab is not a technique, but a statement about what you have decided matters. Velan Sur felt it. The change registered in her footwork before it showed on her face, a half-step backward that she had not planned, an involuntary acknowledgement that the thing in front of her had become more of whatever it was. Marcus stepped into the space she had given him. He threw 1 punch. A straight right hand down the center, with the full commitment of his hips, his shoulders, his feet, his 14-year-old self who had wrapped his hands for the first time in a gym on 4th Street. It was not the fastest punch in the tournament. It was not the hardest. It was the most inevitable, the culmination of a motion that had been practiced so many times that it had stopped being a technique and become a physical law. It landed on Velan Sur's sternum, clean, center. The sound was flat and final, the kind of sound that carries information about the end of an argument. Velan Sur did not fall. She absorbed the strike, reset, and continued fighting. She was a 4-time champion and she fought like one. The last 60 seconds were contested at the highest level the tournament had ever seen, strike for strike, counter for counter. 2 fighters operating at the limit of what their bodies and their training could produce. The tone sounded. The scoring display flickered for a long moment as the system processed the final calculations. Then the numbers settled. Marcus Cole, 14 strikes. Keshal rating, 7.8. Velan Sur, 12 strikes. Keshal rating, 7.1. The arena fell quiet in a way Marcus had never heard a room full of 6,000 people fall quiet. Not shock, not the processing hum. Understanding. The Torvathi were a cerebral species, and they understood what they had seen, and what they had seen required them to reorganize something inside themselves that they had considered settled. The referee raised Marcus's hand. The gold sash was transferred from Velan Sur's hip to Marcus's. It was warm. Kethan Vor was waiting in the tunnel. He was leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, and his expression had completed the journey it had begun 3 days ago in the registration pavilion, from dismissal to curiosity, to recalibration, to something that looked very much like quiet, reluctant, fully earned respect. The Combat Science Division will want to study your methodology, he said. They will want to know how you trained, what your regimen was. What facility produced you? Marcus sat on his bench. He unwrapped his hands for the last time. The cotton was stained with sweat and the faint pink of diluted blood from a cracked knuckle. He folded the wraps carefully and put them in his bag, the way Ray had taught him, Take care of your equipment, and your equipment takes care of you. I trained in a gym that closed down, he said. The floor was concrete with rubber mats that were peeling up at the corners. The bags were leather and they were old. My coach was a man named Ray who ran the place for 30 years and never charged kids who couldn't pay. Kethan Vor was silent. The facility I used before the tournament was the back parking lot of the Traverse Liaison office, Marcus continued. I ran patterns on the asphalt. I hit a bag I hung from a loading dock beam. I skipped rope in the stairwell when it rained. He zipped his bag closed, stood up. You train on dirt, Kethan Vor said. It was the same sentence he had said 3 days ago in the registration pavilion in the tone of a clinical observation. But the tone was different now. The clinical note had burned away. What remained was something the Torvathi language did not have a precise word for, though they would spend the next several years trying to invent one. Their linguists would eventually settle on a compound term that translated roughly as the quality of having been shaped by conditions that should have been insufficient but were not. Marcus put his bag over his shoulder. Mostly. He walked out of the tunnel, through the pavilion where his name still had a silver line drawn through it on the original bracket posting, past the registration desks, where the Torvathi clerks were no longer working, but watching him leave with the particular stillness of people who have just filed something under a new category, and into the cool evening air of Gelashen, where nobody was waiting for him, and the sky was full of unfamiliar stars.